This is the Lydia and Spin with the Lydia Lunch and Tim Doll, episode number 142. Hello,
Hello. How you
Timothy.
doing? Hello. I'm feeling a little better than yesterday. I had flown in yesterday. After a weekend of not a lot of sleep, I flew in from Europe and I was just like, oh, we got to do a podcast, but it was cool. And now I got about 10 hours of sleep last night. It's caught up. And
I'm feeling fine. Of course, I'm feeling fine. I had a good time in Ann Arbor. I'm feeling good. Anyway, came back to this little tidbit.
sure.
In a recent interview, Madison Cawthorn, that stable genius from North Carolina who belongs to the ultra-conservative House of Freedom Caucus,
Okay.
shared some of his thoughts and experiences on his first year in office, including seeing people he'd previously admired doing key bumps of cocaine. I'm like, only key bumps? And inviting him to orgies. Quote, he is the youngest member of Congress. Quote, the sexual perversion that goes on in Washington, being kind of a young guy. I mean, where the average age is probably 60 or 70. I look at all these people. A lot of them I looked up to my whole life. I've always paid attention to politics. Then all of a sudden, you get invited to, well, hey, we're going to have a contest sexual get together at one of our homes. You should come. And I'm like, what did you just ask me to come to? And then you realize they're asking you to come to an orgy. Duh.
Yes.
He then noted that some of the people who are leading the movement to try to remove addiction in our country, you watch them do a key bump of cocaine in front of you. Now, obviously, he has no freaking idea what Republicans really are about. He's surprised that they're doing cocaine and having sex while being anti-drug. I mean, rules only apply to everybody else but them.
Really.
I mean, the whole drug war, we know what that was about. Lock up anybody that wasn't old white octogenarian in politics, basically, almost over. And he also said, working in Washington was the worst job I've ever had. Like, he's had many jobs.
Give me a fucking break.
And he goes, I never want to get that close to the Mason-Dixon line, which is kind of ridiculous since he went to school in Virginia where he was accused multiple times.
He must be really guilty of something, because why is he like playing the moral card?
Well, let me tell you what. He also said, this was his brilliant insight a few months ago. Women are earthen vessels sanctified by Almighty God. Well, he's been accused of numerous sexual harassments and assaults at his college, at Patrick Henry College, near the Mason-Dixon line.
Nice.
He's just a freaking idiot. He's a mental cripple as well.
Yeah. Have you ever whined or cried when you've been invited to an orgy or offered key bumps?
I'm not happy to be offered a key bump, but I mean, orgies, me, myself, and I, honey, I have one almost every night.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer.
You know me, Tim.
Oh, yes. Well, Washington has been in, the spotlight quite a bit recently, and so has the pandemic. But in the last few days, Hollywood kind of took the spotlight. A bunch of stuff happened, actually. Obviously, there's the Chris Rock, Will Smith thing, which everyone seems to be really obsessed with. Bruce Willis, he's going to retire from acting. Yeah.
He's got a brain issue.
Aphasia, is that how you say it?
I mean, he has a brain.
Roar. So yeah, because I was out of town. I didn't watch the Oscars. I missed
I don't watch that crap.
All the stuff that people talk about. I guess I don't care about the gowns that people wear. I don't care about.
I'm gonna make a complaint. I mean, it just goes to show what a wuss Will Smith is. He slaps him in the face.
Well, I mean,
not punches him in the face.
I mean, this guy is one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood. I mean, this guy's getting over 20 million a film. I mean, Chris Rock's obviously rich, but not compared to Will Smith. And we can all talk about the actions and all that stuff. That's a whole different subject. Just before all this shit started, Will Smith sucked. I mean, his music sucks. His little flat top haircut that he had forever sucks.
The best thing about him is he admits his sexual perversion in his memoir, I guess. I just heard a lot of complaints about it, but I'm not going to fucking bother to read that one. I'm just saying. But I mean, again, it was such a banal comment. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, so that's a whole other thing, and I do think it's a dangerous precedent that comedians can just be attacked, like physically assaulted. I mean, this is a whole other. I kind of don't want. Everyone's debating this whole thing. I don't want to go, but I'm definitely not on Will Smith's side. Never have been. Never fucking will be.
Fair
I'm
enough. Not even on Chris Rock's side.
That's fine. That's fine.
But good back in the day.
Anyhow, but what else? Okay, so Bruce Willis is gonna have to retire because he's got this.
About freaking time.
Yeah. His cognitive and his speech skills are plummeting at a rate that will no longer allow him to act.
He probably got dumber hanging out with Demi Moore during the pandemic.
Oh, I'm sure. I didn't remember this. This is also, I guess, staying in the California region of news. 39 years ago, this Chowchilla mass kidnapping of a school bus where they try to bury 26 kids and a school bus driver alive. How did this slip by me? How did I miss that one?
Maybe because you were 5 years old.
No, I was older than that, but 39.
Not much.
My birthday's soon. It's about 7 or 8. But
you can't keep up with everything.
Yeah, but they buried
the whole school bus.
Well, if people don't remember, like I didn't. There's 3 rich kids that were inspired by this Dirty Harry movie, and they planned for 18 months to basically bus jack this school bus with like hoods and shotguns, and there was just all these like children in there, and then they made them all pile into the back of a moving truck rental, a U-Haul or something like that, and then they found a local quarry and buried them alive. Somehow the double-digit IQ school bus driver was smart enough to not give up and go for it, and he knew the escape routes, those the ceiling ones,
right? Yeah,
but they're buried, so I still don't really know. But they dug themselves out, and these 3 guys were busted pretty quickly. And but 2 of them, one of them is just about to get released again years later. And
I mean, letting them out. Why?
I guess good behavior.
I'd say.
I mean, if you're into bad behavior, why would you do it so poorly and then have to be on good behavior for 40 fucking years?
What did he was practicing? Anyway, speaking about dumb and confused, and this isn't even a youngster, a confused Midwestern politician is facing public ridicule after claiming schools were leaving litter trays out for children who identify as cats. Bruce Bostelman, a conservative Republican in the Nebraska legislature, made the claim during a videotaped debate on education funding that racked up more than 500,000 views on social media. So Bostelman said he was a little shocked over stories that children were dressing up in cat and dog costumes, with teachers condoning and even accommodating the trend by leaving litter boxes in the bathroom. And then he said, I think they're called furries. Yeah, I think they're called furries. It's where school children dress up as animals. And during the school day, he said, now they meow and they bark and they interact with their school, with their teachers in this fashion. And now schools are wanting to put litter boxes in their school. How is this sanitary? Now, the unfounded rumor has persisted in a private Facebook group, Protect Nebraska Children, which, by the way, there is a lot of snatching in Nebraska of children. Okay. And so it also surfaced last month in an Iowa school district, forcing the superintendent to write parents that it was simply and emphatically not true. Now, Bostelman said he had planned to discuss the issue with the CEO of the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. He also alleged that schools were not allowing kids to wear flag pins, but didn't give any examples. So anyway, in 2016, Lincoln's public school district asked students not to fly American flags from their vehicles after one flag was pulled from its holder, but school officials later apologized. Now, the false claim that children who identify as cats are using litter boxes in school bathrooms has, of course, spread across the internet. And anyway, the claim was debunked by the district superintendent of Midland Public Schools in Detroit, who said there are not now or ever has there been litter boxes within the school district. Anyway, the furor over public school restrooms, of course, a growing number of conservative states seek laws to ban transgender students. But anyway, let's just say that the real adult furries.
Yeah, well, that's a fetish. I mean, keep it as a fetish.
they started to complain. It's like, that is not at all what furries do.
Nice.
Boxes, dude, we're humans. And we know we're humans. So eventually, Boston had to apologize.
Oh, I like how the fetish adult
to the
furries.
furries. Yeah, he had to apologize to the furries.
Well, that's good. I like how the fetish adults are kind of bullied kids. You're doing it wrong. I mean, you don't want kitty litter boxes in public school bathrooms. You just don't want people in general doing it unless it's a practical joke. Now, I've talked about that for years. If you're in someone's house, you don't really like them, and they go, I'm gonna go out to the store for a while, and they're cappers, and then you decide to maybe defecate in the litter box. So when they're like later cleaning it, they're like, I think Fifi has something wrong. Like, what is going on? That's a whole other, angle.
The previous scandal with Madison Cawthorn. I mean, now the GOP is all up in arms, and they're like, name names. So he's walking it back, probably because he doesn't want to name names.
There you go.
Hello.
There you go. Let's see here. I got. Well, there was a really kind of awkward incident that happened in New Jersey just the other day. It was like this multi-car accident, but it wasn't that it was a multi-car accident, which happens. It was on Route 17, New Jersey, just one of these kind of strip mall, New Jersey kind of highways. But it involved a horse carriage now and a minivan from a funeral home. I guess they don't do the hearse anymore. I guess there was a corpse in a Honda Odyssey, and then there's a bunch of cars. And just when people are thinking, okay, it's a bad car accident, blah blah blah, next thing you know, because the corpse went flying through the windshield.
Oh my word!
But the horse was fine. So then, like, all these people were slowly driving by, and you had this like just kind of ripped apart corpse, and then you have like a horse, like, what's going on? That was a fine, just hanging around, and all these families. So it's like a real, if you talk about rubbernecking, I mean, that's when it's justified when you come across that.
In Barcelona, they had this incredible museum that you could only go knock on the door and see if anybody would let you in, but it was all funeral carriages, like the kind that the Munsters would drive, really big, beautiful black carriages, some pulled by horses. And one time I went and knocked on the door at like 7:00. They let us in, and they let us go and sit in some of these Munster-like carriages. They were beautiful. Yeah. They don't make them like that anymore.
No, they don't.
Now you're in a minivan.
Yeah. They just throw you in there. I guess the purpose of having like I guess people wanted to be like the dead are sacred, and they want to drive them around in something that looks fancy. Okay. I just realized that now.
Well, and there were no minivans, 75 or 80 years ago either. So
that's true. So Tyree Sampson, who's only 14 years old, was
this is tragic.
Decided to get on the Orlando Free Fall, which is supposedly the world's tallest freestanding drop tower, an amusement park ride. Right? They basically
didn't he have some trepidation to begin with? He did.
Oh, you might have read a different story than me.
He went on with some trepidation. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, that happens probably regularly. People are a little hesitant sometimes. And anyhow, it's 430 feet, and it's basically this kind of cylinder thing, and they have this ring around it that you're in, and then it brings up, I would guess, I'm making it up, probably 40 fucking people at a time. And you get to the top, and you're supposed to be all strapped in. And then the seat starts basically turning inwards, where you're kind of face down, just to make it a little more dramatic. But you're supposed to be strapped in, so it's like you're going up kind of vertically.
He was strapped in, but
he was. But just to give the listener a sense, like when you're doing the free fall, it's like face down. You're seeing it straight. Your potential death coming straight out. So he got about halfway through, and the whole thing opened up, and he went. I haven't seen the video, but supposedly you have this like floppy body just flying off. But this is what, you have all these lawyers and slingshot. Oh boy, slingshot operations. I don't know if they made the ride, or because they weren't telling me which amusement park this was. I was looking all over, but it might be one of these kind of like third tier, fourth tier kind of cheaper ones in Orlando.
But the point was
the point was, the ride's not supposed to operate at all unless all the safety mechanisms are in place, which means like you're strapped in and it's secure.
Which supposedly he was, but
so they're in. Well, it didn't. It's open, and the whole thing.
I'll tell you what the issue was.
Okay.
He was 62. He was 62 pounds over the weight limit.
Wait, so this 14-year-old was so obese?
Yes.
Oh.
He was over 300 pounds, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
You missed that golden nugget.
Well, so I must have read an
earlier
version.
It reminds me, I used to love the hellhole at Coney Island. You know, it's like it's centrifugal force. It's a giant barrel that you stand in, and it spins really fast, and you start sliding up and down.
Oh yeah. I know that thing.
You think you're gonna vomit on the person. I love those rides.
Wait. It had the limit has. I mean, Orlando, Florida, it has to be more than 300 pounds. Well, it has to be over like 500 pounds.
Well, you said
a lot of motherfuckers in America are over 300 pounds.
You said you didn't know what amusement park this was at. Neither do I.
Yes,
rides might have a weight limit, and I think
I'm sure they do. I just think 300 is probably too little, especially if you're dealing with America. I think it would have to be like over 500.
Well,
that's my hunch.
All right, you can bring that up on the next.
Hold on. I got an animal story here. Potato the dog didn't make it. From somewhere in Southern California. God, my research. The sago palm. It had sago palm poisoning. They didn't know what was happening. Things starts going into a seizure, puke, and then they're like, the family's like, did he break into the medicine cabinet? Why is this thing? So they did. They opened him up after he passed, and they're like, oh no, it's just palm poisoning. It seems like there's a lot of things that dogs are allergic to. I mean, chocolate, I've heard,
onions,
raisins, and of course they'll just eat it. But like, I'm surprised they make it so often because they just want to eat everything all the time. And anyhow,
point is,
Potato the dog did not make it for eating eating a sago palm seed.
All right, how
which are all over Southern California.
Did you hear about the storks?
No, I just saw a bunch.
I believe it's two storks. It's either storks or flamingos that were in a Kansas City zoo. That one flew out or escaped 17 years ago during a storm, and was recently found in Texas alive.
No, wait. So it was tagged.
It was tagged.
Yeah, it sounds like a stork. Probably. I don't think a pelican
or a flamingo would make it
or a flamingo would make it that far. But
I don't think so either.
I think it was definitely a stork. I mean, some. I think I've talked to you about this before. I was just curious. I'm like, what animals sleep the most? And you have felines. If any cat thing sleeps like 18 hours a day, 19 hours a day. And then I was like, well, then what sleeps the least?
Sharks. Never.
Well, dolphins they'll split their hemispheres of their brain. So half their brain will fall asleep. The other, but there's this one migratory bird. I wish I had it off the top of my head that I think sleeps like 3 days a year. Like it's just basically just flying all the time.
My spirit animal.
Maybe. Oh, now your spirit home is for sale. Maybe.
Do tell.
Terrible Tilly, it's its name.
I'm not aware.
Terrible Tilly.
I'm counting my pennies. Is
a retired lighthouse off of Oregon. That's going for sale. Yeah, it kind of had to be rich. I think it's 6.5 million, but it's supposed to be totally haunted. There's all these shipwrecks and all the fog comes rolling in, and
it's expensive. It's expensive to die these days, and ghosts are really expensive.
Yeah. So this is you need a helicopter to get there, but it's supposed to have had just all these tragic kind of sailor sea events, and but it looks pretty spectacular, and it's especially if that Oregon fog comes rolling in.
Well, I'll put that on our visitation list there.
But did you ever tell me that you kind of have a thing for lighthouses or not?
I do.
And haunted ones.
Well, which aren't?
Right.
And it just seems like, of course, they're. I mean, look, spirits. If you believe in them, they like water.
Right.
There you go.
Right.
They love fog. What is a ghost? As I like to say, what is a ghost? But too much energy, too much emotion, too much. I must be a fucking ghost. Anyway,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm closing it out.
You have to. I was going to ask you a fog question, but it's so dumb.
Well, actually, I was just telling somebody the other day as we were coming in through a cloud bank about how heavy clouds are. You don't really think about it, but clouds are immensely heavy because they're water.
Right.
But now
right.
I have to go and see exactly how much the smallest and the biggest cloud known to man weighs. Anyway, speaking of ghosts and transports and people whose legacy lives on, our next guest is Tansey Rosset, the daughter of my hero of all publishing, Barney Rosset of Grove Press and Evergreen Review. So this is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Tansey Rosset.
Thus we walked and slept and ate together, the Siamese twins who love and joined and whom death alone could separate. We walked upside down, hand in hand, at the neck of the bottle. She dressed in black almost exclusively, except for patches of purple now and then. She wore no underclothes, just a simple sheath of black velvet saturated with a diabolical perfume. We went to bed at dawn and got up just as it was darkling. We lived in black holes with drawn curtains. We ate from black plates. We read from black books. We looked out at the black hole of our life into the black hole of the world. The sun was permanently blacked out as though to aid us in our continuous interscene strife. For sun we had Mars. For moon, Saturn. We lived permanently in the zenith of the underworld.
That's an excerpt from Henry Miller's Tropic of Capricorn, written in 1933 and published by Grove Press in 1962, the follow-up to his book, Tropic of Cancer. The music is by Grid from our forthcoming LP.
This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and our special guest, Tansey Rosset. Now, in a very connective tissue and bizarrely trust the witch moment, I was recently at the Ann Arbor Film Festival doing a variety of things with Joseph Keckler, including one called In Conversation with Me, where we were showing a variety of clips, you know, mostly the different genres that I've performed in. And I didn't even remember mentioning, because I often do, Barney Rosset, the publisher of Grove Press. And I guess I had mentioned him. And so I'm sitting down to dinner a few minutes later, and the woman next to me goes, Tansey Rosset was in the audience. And I'm like, what?
Well, that's amazing. I mean, but did you announce it out loud, or someone said, and then you kind of intuitively knew who that was?
Well, I didn't know. I'd never heard of her before, but I mean, the woman next to me said it's Barney Rosset's daughter. And then I had to ask Simon, didn't I just mention Barney Rosset on the Tim McLaughlin thing last week? He goes, you mentioned Barney Rosset all the time. So let me begin. In high school, Barney Rosset published a mimeograph journal, much mystery remains because we haven't read it, called The Anti-Everything. Now, already I'm picking up on his vibe. So in the early 1950s, Barney Rosset bought Grove Press for $3,000. And soon after that, he helped usher in almost single-handedly, a new counterculture by publishing the Evergreen Review, where he championed beat poets, French surrealists, German expressionists, dramatists, absurdists of all kinds. And Barney Rosset was the first U.S. publisher to print beat writers like Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, as well as, you know, my personal hero, two of them, Hubert Shelby Jr. and Henry Miller, John Retchie, D.H. Lawrence, Samuel Beckett, Jean Genet, Stopper, Malcolm, the list goes on.
Yeah, come on.
And
legends.
His goal from the beginning, he said, was to publish Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, which of course had already been published in Paris in 1934 and had been ever since banned in the USA. And so he defied, total badass, censors in the 1960s by publishing. First, he started with D.H. Lawrence, later Chatterley's Lover, because he was already a renowned author, and only basically to get Tropic of Cancer published. And the beauty is, I think it was 60 trials he went to, and his legal victories actually opened the door so that literature like my own could be published. And fighting all of these battles, I mean, it actually forced and changed the government to reinterpret the First Amendment. Now, his insistence on publishing banned books, it permanently redefined the American obscenity laws, which we need to revive as ghosts, because now we're going back into a form of censorship.
We're going back into it. But what about handling versus the United States? I mean, wasn't it ultimately the distributors who got fucked the most?
Well,
I mean,
yeah, the post office also started. Let me finish.
Exactly. Okay.
He called Grove Press a breach in the dam of American puritanicalism. So once Tropic of Cancer, and again, I can't even tell you the importance of Henry Miller and Hubert Selby to my 13-year-old mind, hit the stores in 1961. More charges erupted against Grove and booksellers. But in 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to review and reversed the ban against the Miller book. And how that was reversed was that Barney Rosset actually read some of Miller's writing, obviously not the raunchiest parts, and the jury was actually laughing. So, which I laugh and I cry and I wet my pants. But besides being sued, dozens of times, he also received death threats. And the Grove Press office in Greenwich Village was bombed because of his printing of Che Guevara's diaries, which he actually went to Bolivia and purchased to publish. So it was 1962, before a lot of the people's birth who are listening to this, when he released Naked Lunch, Burroughs' book. And, that he had already printed 100,000 copies, but kept it under wrap until the Tropic of Cancer case, because it was still in the courts. And almost immediately, a Boston court found Naked Lunch without social merit and banned it. But wisely enough, once again, going higher court, Supreme Court reversed that judgment in 1966. Now, as the badass of American publishing to me, and without what he published, I don't even think I would be sitting here, because as I've said 1,000 times, literature was what inspired me to do what I do. And decades after his death, he still remains one of the most hardcore publishers and fighters against censorship, and has been recognized by the National Coalition Against Censorship for his work, received the Lifetime Achievement Award for the Literarian Award from the National Book Foundation, and love it or loathe them, also the Norman Mailer Award. So here I am with Tansey Rosset. And as I was just saying to her, what's strange is I considered Barney Rosset to be a mental health practitioner for those of us that needed to read literature that directly related to our life experiences. And now she, here speaking with us tonight, is a nurse practitioner tending to children, perhaps future writers. Welcome, Tansey.
Thank you, Lydia. It's really an honor to be here and to get to talk with you. It means a lot.
Did you have a great relationship with your father?
To be honest, it was really up and down.
Right.
I mean, he is my hero, and he drove me crazy.
Okay.
Different times in my life
because of his obsessions and his drive and his mania,
and his drinking, perhaps, and his rapscallion nature, perhaps. I mean, he was really of a different generation. He was a rascal.
He was, but I think, like, one thing when I look back, I think, is that he was open to everyone. He was open to men, to women, to gay people, to trans people, before we even talked about them that way. He was open to me trying anything I wanted to do in my life, even when it didn't make sense to him. Yeah, medicine was not his thing, but when I said that's what I want to do, he said, do it to the max that you have in your heart, because that's the kind of person he was. He put himself into everything that he did to the fullest.
It was Neil Cooper of Roar Cassettes that told me I should meet Barney Rosset. And when I did, he published my first book with a poetry, only book of poetry at that time, almost to this day, Adulterers Anonymous, which I wrote with Exene Cervenka, which was by no means a classic poetry book. And I was just so thrilled. I mean, it was one of the highlights of my so-called career, that he saw something in that book, and maybe he liked the title, or maybe he liked the look of two witches on the cover. I don't care what he liked. I liked him. I know generations that touched the Great Depression. I mean, everything else kind of is a little easier. So wait a second. Actually, Tansey, why don't you talk about the fact that he was a war photographer? That might have impacted.
Well, interestingly, actually, my dad was an only child of a wealthy family. But he took that very seriously. Like, he saw that as a responsibility to give back. He spent all his money on his court trials and defending people and paying his authors, and literally was bankrupt by the end of the 70s.
Even though he bought Grove Press for really cheap, he also sold it really cheap to one of the Gettys after publishing just some of the most important books in American literature.
Yeah, so I think he really understood the separations in society, and they were, important to him, that people were discriminated against or excluded, and then during the war, being in China and photographing, he was in the Signal Corps in the Army, and that was his position, was as a photographer. And it was, a life altering experience as it was for everyone else over there. But when he came back, I always feel like he was a really in-between person. Like, he never perfectly fit in any one place, and he was always moving forward. And I think that's how he meant so much to so many different people over these many generations, because he was just a forward-looking person. He never stopped, no matter how old he was. When he was 50 and 60 and 70, he was moving forward in his mind.
People know their favorite writers, but they rarely think of who published them, because probably by the time they read them, or by the time Barney Rosset had achieved what he did, we were allowed to read the books that were out there.
Just the other day, my daughter came home from high school with a copy of Malcolm X. I'm like, this is amazing in a sense. Like, this is just standard fare for 11th and 12th graders. Like, that's incredible.
Did he have
when you think of what
amazing.
It took to
which he published Malcolm X.
Yes,
exactly.
But did he have an FBI file on him? Like, when he passed, and you could,
he did.
So
he did.
Besides just being drained financially by having to deal with all the litigious bullshit, when you're that radical, you're going to be harassed by the government. And so, did you see how that, in what form did that kind of trickle down?
Well, that was a big theme of my childhood, and that, again, I taken a long time for me to grasp and understand. But, as William Burroughs said, paranoia is having just the right information. And I think that he grasped the level of surveillance of American society years before most other people. And at the time, as a younger, even in the 70s, I have memories of a lot of craziness about the telephone and who's on the telephone, and is the telephone working, and going out and walking around the East Village with him and the payphones, and a lot of concerns about the phones. But turns out he was totally right. He had 12 feet of binders of his FOIA papers when he died.
And he did that for the liberation of so many other people. He was the scapegoat that would not take it lying down to fight against the immorality of this country's bullshit. And I'm going to misquote William Burroughs, because I have a piece and I often start like, the question isn't whether you're paranoid, it's whether you're paranoid enough. Freedom is just a hallucination.
So when other people, because some people, I was mentioning earlier, Hamling versus United States, who were selling the material, they're the merchants, they're not the publishers, and they lost, and then they lost. They won. It was kind of a mixed thing. Like the patriarch of the family had to, basically, he was censored for the rest of his life, and so even if your father was bankrupt just by the drain of all these lawyers, still had his dignity at the end, where some people actually really, just completely fully censored from society. What was his relationship with these people? What was he thinking when we seen some people fall down around him and really fall into dark holes? Did he ever make commentary on damage, the collateral damage around him?
He recognized it. It was painful. I mean, I think he saw that this is how the people in power try to succeed. They conquer and, they divide and conquer. They weaken people by dividing them. And it made him really sad. A similar thing I think is when he was in New York City at the time of 9/11, and which was incredibly devastating for everybody and for him. And he became very ill in the very few days after the event. And I flew to New York, and you couldn't, but I flew to Newark and came in on a bus with the guard and the machine guns and everything. And it was just devastation. And he was so sad because he felt like this was just, and he saw the potential divisions that were coming to humanity from that event. And the person that took care of him and partially really saved his life was a doctor from the Middle East who was named Dr. Osama. And it was just, that was my dad. Look, the person who's saving me is also named Osama. These are, always looking for the connections, not the separating.
Yeah. My father my father actually died a few months after that, but he said with 9/11, he goes, I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised. And that you can take that any way you want, but
I'm not going into my theories of 9/11 because I've read about 1,000 different reports on it, and I'm only the only report I would like to see is the 11,000 architects who demand another investigation. I will say no more.
What was his early spark, you think? Was there any singular event that really said, okay, I'm going to experience everything I want and I'm going to stand by all this?
Yeah, I mean, my dad had the unusual experience in the 20s and 30s of having a Jewish father who was not a religious person, but culturally identified. And his mother was an Irish immigrant. And so he experienced a lot of anti-Semitism, even though his family did not operate within a Jewish community because his mother was excluded. And that had a pretty intense impact on him. And then to go to the war and be in China and the Japanese versus the Chinese. And I mean, he came back. One of the first things he did when he returned from China was make a movie called Strange Victory, which was about racism in the United States. And his first love was film. He wanted to make movies.
Did he go to college with Wexler? An amazing.
Actually, they went to high school together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he went to a progressive high school in Chicago with Haskell Wexler, the amazing cinematographer.
Which high school?
Francis Parker High School.
Oh yeah, Parker. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah,
That's a private school.
His love of films, though, also. So he made this film, which was not really widely accepted at the time, unfortunately. Maybe it needs to have a comeback. But then also he started importing, like I Am Curious Yellow. So I mean, his love between literature and also filmmaking. I mean, did he open? He opened a theater for a while, didn't he?
He did. He had a theater in the West Village, the Evergreen Theater. And then he also did film with Buster Keaton and Samuel Beckett.
Wow.
Wait.
Cool.
Just back up and say it. Samuel Beckett and Buster Keaton. I love it. Yeah. One of my saddest days is that I wasn't able to do a film with Jerry Lewis when he was playing his Buddy Love character. Just saying.
Did he ever make commentary? As obscenity law gets more and more deeper to the heart, the core. into things like hardcore pornography and all this stuff, which wasn't what he was naturally publishing at all. But
well, wait a minute, Tim.
Well, I'm not talking about the material. I'm not talking about the content.
He got a lot of flack for going on Midnight Blue with Al Goldstein.
Goldstein.
I don't blame him because
but
I'm a Larry Flint guy, not an Al Goldstein. But I'm just saying.
Midnight Blue. Sure, fine. So I don't know his interview with him. I'm actually curious.
I'm telling you, it was a troublesome moment for him because at that point, it was when there was a feminist uprising. Like, why is this rascally, alcoholic, pornography obsessed man not, publishing these other pornographic alcoholic writers, which of course those writers fed me what I needed to become a writer myself. It was kind of a touchy moment for him at that point with that.
Did he talk to you about any of this stuff? Like in terms of, was there ever a point where he was thinking, oh, maybe I have my own lines on this, or he's just, I don't believe that's what he ever thought, but did he ever?
He never wavered in his support of the First Amendment and freedom of speech.
That's what I suspected.
Yeah. He never wavered in that. Did he, maybe think that wasn't a wise move? I wish I hadn't done that. I think he did, in the sense that it became such a focal point when it really shouldn't have been. It wasn't the point of his life. It wasn't his work. It wasn't his true passion in life. It was an opportunity that maybe on a different day he would have said no, but on that day he said yes. And
also, I want to bring up the fact that he published the absolute best translations of the Marquis de Sade, whose birthday I share. And by the way, they need to realize the point of the Marquis de Sade, and not only his philosophy, but the fact that he was talking about what we're going through now. He was absolutely describing an Epstein universe, which means if you have the money, you can fucking kill what you want. And whether or not he partook in those activities, he was describing them. And they needed to be described. And also what needed to be described in the Marquis de Sade is an alternative perspective on pleasure and pain as it was. And just and they are the best translations. Don't even ask me how I got a hold of them when I did, but I even have a hardback copy of the first edition. And I think people totally misinterpret what publishing the Marquis de Sade actually stood for. And it is not the pornography, which becomes all by its repetition. It is the philosophy behind certain mindsets, and also sociologically what it represented. That's what I took from it. And one of the best pieces of writing from Marquis de Sade is, dialogue between a priest and a dying man, which is his verbalization of anti-God. Nature versus God. And we know I've been screaming about God for as long since I read the first Bible. Anyway, now, Barney Rosset was married 5 times. Problem there, should have never been married. Jesus Christ, just have a harem, honey. Just saying. You were the product of his third wife?
Correct, yes.
But he was also married to Joan. He was also married to a really an important female abstract artist, Joan Mitchell.
Yeah. So they went to high school together. So Joan Mitchell also went to Frances Parker. She was from a well-known Chicago family, and studied at the Art Institute in Chicago. And when he came back from China, they lived together in Brooklyn and got married. And then they moved to France, and then she decided to stay there and he came back. I met her many times. They remained lifelong friends until she passed away. She was an incredible human being.
Did you grow up in New York?
I did. Yep. In the West Village on Houston Street. Yep. That's where I grew up. And my dad, he really believed in having us around. When my parents would go to a party or something, they would often take my brother and I with them. I remember going out to dinner with Samuel Beckett in Paris. I remember going to clubs. I mean, he was the one that sent me off to meet you, Lydia, when I was 14 at the Peppermint Lounge.
Wait a minute. Okay, roll that back. Tell me about that. I have no idea.
He said, I'm publishing this book by these women, and they're going to be at this club, and you should go. and that was the first time I met you.
I don't even remember
Wow.
that. And so you saw rude hieroglyphics. We actually performed that at the Peppermint Lounge. Xena and I.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
I have my autographed copy.
Wow.
Yeah.
The connective tissue of the Lydian spin is even beyond my comprehension sometimes.
That's amazing.
But
It's really
he
amazing.
was a really he was interested in everything. I mean, he didn't find anything boring. He would just try to find what someone was interested in and find something about that he found interesting. He could talk about almost anything if he needed to.
I really think that maybe what he saw in me, and I don't even think it was the book. I think that he did see something in me, as a few other people have, like Michael Zilka saw at a very early age with me, my musical schizophrenia. I think because I believe I only met him once, Barney Rosset, and I think he just saw it in me. First of all, maybe he recognized that I was a dirty old man, even at a very early age. Hello. And maybe he just realized what he actually brought to me and what I might eventually bring to others, because it was because of those books that I knew I had a mission. And my mission, in a sense, was to fill in this gap that I did feel that these male writers who I so loved, that they opened a door for me, my arrogance even at 13, and that I needed to go in there with words, with literature, with spoken word, with books, and somehow cubby up against that. When I say cubby, of course, Hubert Selby Jr., who wrote the introduction to my the first publishing of Paradoxia, and who I knocked on his door and took on tour because Last Exit to Brooklyn, thank you, Barney Rosset, was so important to me.
What about this rumor that Sam Beckett befriended a teenage Andre the Giant in France when he was living there? Did you hear about that?
That I have not heard about.
Oh yeah. Because Andre the Giant.
Tim, you've said this to me before.
I know.
I love this.
Because as we know, Beckett had moved to France, and he would be driving. I don't know where he was living, some village outside of Paris, I think. And Andre the Giant, as a young kid, had this disease where he just wouldn't stop growing, and he's like, we always know about the awkward, gawky teenager, but this was like psychedelic next level. It's like this giant thing with this kind of fro mullet, and Sam Beckett's
sweating to his belly button.
Sam Beckett was like, I want to know who that is, even though it's like a 14, 15-year-old boy. And he would regularly drive him to school and pick him up. You see him at the bus stop. He's like, you need a ride. And those two became friends.
Now, Tim, Andre the Giant did not become my friend, but I did meet him, and he was sweating to his belly button. And I love being, I myself, being petite, I love standing next to someone as big as Andre the Giant. But also, I quote Beckett all the time. I love this phrase: I can't go on, I'll go on. That is the story of my life. Oh, I'll go on.
And I think, Beckett has become elevated to, in some way, to this super academic. People are writing their PhDs about Samuel Beckett, blah, blah, blah. But, back then, like Samuel Beckett, I think the connection that he felt with my dad is that they were both on the outside of something. They did not fit, and they loved each other for that.
Well, is that one reason why he moved to France? It's because he was being censored in Ireland, right? I've heard a lot of different theories, but like he would write in French to avoid the Irish censors. So and then he would translate it back.
Well, yeah, and he just took that on as his life, his country.
Miller and D.H. Lynch, they weren't banned in France. Miller was published in France very early on, but they were banned in the U.S. Beckett being banned then in Ireland later on, and then published in France, because France, for some reason, does understand the idea of not only literature, but the literature of sex, of death, of romance, of dark obsession, and they always have.
I mean, and one thing, just rolling with Lydia over the years, and when she runs into one of her own, in other words, not saying a equivalent or a parallel, but on this side, honestly, when someone's had to fight for something and they've stood for something and they've been that consistent, and then when you kind of recognize, okay, this person has had a similar journey, not the exact same one, there's kind of, you actually trust that more than any fucking system. There's finally someone that's going to actually stand by you. You see eye to eye because you're being attacked regularly, and you guys are essentially standing for the same morals or whatever the same.
And thank you for saying that,
philosophy.
Tim. I don't feel like I'm attacked, because if I am, I don't fucking hear it, because I'm not out there listening to the chatter. I'm just not. But as an outsider who has fought and also fights continually for myself and other outsiders, which is also why I was connected to Barney Rosset and all the writers he published, is we do occupy this certain terrain, and especially writers. Nobody understands the onanistic nature of a writer and really how painful it is to do that. At least with music, you're surrounded by other miscreants. As a writer, you're stuck in your own hole trying to write your way out. And this is why so many writers are alcoholics or drug addicts or just sad fucking sacks. And that's why we needed somebody who also knew what it was like to suffer, and maybe who drank and was, rapscallion. So Tansey, first of all, I wanted to ask you, how the hell did you get into the Peppermint Lounge at 14? I mean, I know I was never ID'd in New York back then.
They had a back door that was off of Fifth Avenue.
Excellent.
I also had a really amazing New Year's Eve there once when I was probably about 16. Yeah.
I had some good times there. Who else did you as a child or a teenager go to dinner with or lunch besides Samuel Beckett? How amazing was that anyway?
Yeah. Well, we spent time with Alan Schneider, who was a director of many of the Beckett productions, mostly when I was a younger child, who was a really amazing human being and really kind to me as a kid. I met Kathy Acker, Michael Thelwell, who wrote The Harder They Come. When I was pretty young, we went to Jamaica also to visit. That was amazing.
Okay.
Did you ever meet Hubert Shelby?
No, I didn't. And I didn't meet William Burroughs either. I did meet Allen Ginsberg a couple of different times, who was the sweetest human being. One thing I realized as an adult about my dad is that every time I've met someone who knew him, just like meeting you, Lydia, they exude to me so much love of my father. And it's amazing. It's so amazing. It's such a gift as an adult to get that from people I've never met before. And then they hear that he's my dad. And it's just this outpouring of love and gratitude. And
I just got goosebumps. I really did.
That's amazing.
Because really, in some ways, I did think of him as kind of my dad, as far as what I learned from him by what he published. And it was just so shocking to me meeting him and him saying, oh yeah, I'll publish this poetry. And it was just so fantastic. So, I mean, I did feel like he was kind of my educational father.
And what was the hardest part about him being your father to you?
Well, there was a lot of ups and downs. There was like, oh, we're living this really amazing life. We travel, we live in a big house, we go out. I mean, back then, Long Island was very different than it is now. But, we have a house in the country, and then it all collapsed. And I didn't take that as like angry at him or like, oh, you really messed up and lost all your money. I really took that as commentary on the incredible dysfunction in this country, the massive mistreatment of people on the edges, and the continued disenfranchisement of our creative soul. And we are killing that in this country. And I am so fucking angry about that, Lydia.
Come to me, sister. I know what you're talking about. I've been an angry woman my entire life. And again, Tim, I would ask you, Tim, have you ever seen me angry? Well, I'm angry on a big fucking scale. I'm rarely angry on a small scale. And one of the things I'm very angry about, well, there's so many things I don't have time to talk about it right now. Go ahead, Tim.
So how old were you when your mom and your dad split up?
I was around 13. And so my dad was married twice previously to Joan and Loli, and I have an older brother, Peter. And we all knew each other. We all operated together. We all had family functions and, spent time together throughout the whole duration. Then he married Lisa and had my sister Chantal. Lisa is amazing, a part of my life. And then he met Astrid, and Astrid, I'm really grateful to Astrid. She really cared for my dad for many, many years and supported him in his never ceasing creative endeavors. Like, he never stopped. He never gave up.
And really, it becomes like a philosophical commune of people that share, because I'm much more of a communist than I am of a traditional. I don't believe in the tradition of marriage. I don't believe in, reading. It's a lot of things I don't believe in that are traditions to America. I understand polygamy. I do. But of course, I'm too much for most men, even a six-pack of men. I'm usually too much for, I understand. But I understand a philosophical, communal coming together for just those reasons, for those very reasons, a philosophical combination of people. It's like what a band is.
Right. And it was always my whole life, like, who came before who? How are you related to this person? And, when I was a kid, I didn't understand it at all. I was like, Joan is this person in my life. Loli is the person that comes to visit. And then my brother Peter, and everyone was always like trying to dissect it and take it apart.
But as you get older, you realize realize that in this case, your dad chose wisely. But as you grow into adulthood, you realize your real family is those who you choose it to be. And sometimes you might like who the blood relations are. That isn't always the case. You happen to be kind of lucky there, honey.
Yeah. Also, though, when we hear about your dad or certain movie stars that are from a certain generation, they've been married a million times. There was a different infrastructure, a different way people had intimate relationships. And it was kind of a cultural thing back in the day that you kind of had to get married, whether you even in your court disagreed with that. But that's why you would see people married all those times.
Well, me, Tim, I'm a chronic honeymooner.
Ha, 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 ha. And you also like the honeymooners
well, that's also true. I'm in
Bensonhurst right now, so yeah.
I stage my own versions often. Thank you very much. What were some of your favorite books that were published under Grove Press, or favorite authors from Evergreen Review? Tansey.
Well, I love Things Fall Apart. That was a really, and the Malcolm X book. I read both of those in high school, and they really, really opened my mind. I think that was really contributed to my passion in life of just help of being present for other people, which I do through healthcare. But, being present, witnessing what people go through.
And it must be difficult. Especially the last few years as a nurse practitioner. And just so difficult dealing with people's fears. And even just today, they're saying people over 50 get the fourth booster. Well, maybe not. Maybe people over 65. Well, maybe people over 18 and they don't really know what's going on now. How has it been dealing with COVID for the past few years as somebody working as a health professional? It must just be bruising and
it's a huge challenge. It is like, it it really, when it started, you know, it really brought me back to my core of why did I go into this? You know, I went into this because I felt like it was the thing I was meant to do, was to be a nurse, to help people in that way. And also, like my dad, like to have no fear. And I lived in the West Village during the 80s. I remember AIDS. I remember the devastation. I remember the ACT UP demonstrations. Like, go out there, have no fear, love these people. They are human just like we are.
You know, it's interesting because just like AIDS, CDC professionals would be standing outside of these bathhouses saying, please don't go inside. And the distrust that the gay community had for institutions, like we're seeing now with some working class and certain people that don't, because the institutions historically treated them badly, even if the information was correct, even if it was correct. And so you have these feedback chambers of these things collapsing on themselves. It's
right. And this is where I think that, like, people often say to me, like, how could you end up in medicine when your dad, you know, he was in publishing and literature? And I think, you know, what I bring from my dad and my life to medicine is a humanity connection, a humanistic
Great answer. Yeah, great point.
And it's what I said earlier. He really was a mental health practitioner for those of us that needed to hear people talking about like-minded, like reality situations. It makes total sense to me.
I mean, the interface, you know, if you're going to find your own place in the family, if you're going to find yourself, whatever that is, what you can get from your family and from your experiences is the gift, is the interface. And some people try to compartmentalize, but it's beautiful that you can take that element from your father and somehow fuse it into what you do.
Tansey, have you been able to avoid being infected with COVID?
I have. It's incredible.
Amazing.
So have I. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. You know, but I'm also open to it. I'm like, if that's what happens, that's what happens. Like, I'm not gonna not go to work. I'm not gonna not do what I can to help somebody. You know, I'm gonna be right there.
What's interesting though is because you're saying this really made you face, well, this is the whole point. And it's maybe it took a pandemic to remind me, but this is the whole point of why I committed to this profession in New York, because New York, as you know, was really the hotspot for a couple times, actually. The amount of professionals, MDs, nurse practitioners that kind of went, you know what, see ya. And there's unfortunately, there's a lot of people who maybe didn't love it as much. They basically, it was a huge percentage. I found out we're just kind of taking a leave of absence for a while. And has that been revealing in your community? Or
it's such a complicated situation. I mean, the lack of care for people who go into healthcare.
Just again, so true. The lack of care and respect for people that go into healthcare, big freaking issue here, because nobody knows what you face every day, even on the most minor of days, even on the easiest of days. People have no understanding of what that is and how much compassion you do.
So you're a nurse practitioner for a hospital?
I work for
pediatrics, right.
Yeah. Yep. So babies all the way to 18, 19-year-old people.
Okay.
Yeah.
In what town? What town or city?
In Ann Arbor.
Yeah. Ann Arbor. Okay. All right. Okay.
You know, Lydia, I was thinking a lot about, like, you talking about being a teenager, me thinking about my teenager-ish life and the teens that I meet. And I think, you know, about this idea of, like, I listened to your interview with David Amram, you know, you're only as old as you make people feel, or you're, you know, like, I really got that from my dad. Like, I love talking to teenagers. Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes like,
annoying, and other times pretty enlightening.
But we have to maintain that connection across age and time.
And this is the biggest imbalance in generation power in the history of the planet. And it's if you look at this, the age of the Senate and the White House, at one point it's just basically like, do you hate your kids? Do you hate your grandkids? Why won't you trust them? Why won't you trust them?
Why won't you listen to the reason that people have? Exactly.
And do you trust yourself? Did you do a good enough job? Why aren't you trusting them?
Tim, you're forgetting it's all in the pocket of who's putting what in the pocket and what they're going to trust or say they trust. That doesn't matter. And I just want to say this. Look, I used to be the baby. When I ran away to New York, I was the baby. Now I'm the den mother. And age means nothing to me at all. We used to think anyone over 30, now I don't trust most people under 40. I make exceptions. Exceptions. Age is a number, like time is a construct. I mean, and it is how lively you are in the here and now and how much you're still understanding the differential between 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago. And the main problem to me is not how different things are, but how the same things, how it is the same. We still have war. We still have viruses. We still have pandemic. We have poverty, mass incarceration. We have financial slavery. We have such a wide division in the wealth gap. To me, it's not how much we've changed. It's how much we have remained the same. And that the new puritanical cancel culture is in, which is why we have to do the podcast, which is why we have to talk about people like Barney Rosset and the writers that mattered and fought. I love the fact that Henry Miller refused to go to court. He's like, fuck you, I'm not going. So Barney Rosset went. And that's kind of what we do on a much smaller level. I will say what others, I don't care whether you want to hear it or not, that has to be said, because there is a psychic and intellectual and philosophical minority of outsiders that are not going with the grain that is now being pushed down our throats, which is almost we can go back to the origins of this country. Censorship, religious perversion, kill the outsider. I don't need anger, please, on a grand scale for me. Tim?
Well, I wonder what your father would say. Obviously, the Christian right are a big group that was always trying to censor this. But, and this is heartbreaking as being raised as a leftist and all that stuff, there is this element from the left now that is basically is terrified, puritanical and really rigid. And it's so inconsistent with the history. Yeah. And you know, I was thinking about the other day, because I think this new censorship from the left is still a right-wing thing, and it's connected with the erosion of labor, and basically as you start privatizing all these universities, for-profit diversity. Ronald Reagan comes in, yet you also have a Bard College or Hampshire College. It's for-profit diversity. Oprah Winfrey, for-profit selling diversity. So. You know,
I have to cut it.
Hear me out. So just before, like someone like Lydia Lunch, who would find a loft space, I'm going to bring it to the public, and then I'm going to let the diverse public decide, as opposed to someone in power saying these things have to be lined up, this X, Y, and Z before the art starts. It doesn't, like the art doesn't start and then people decide. It has to start, you know, upon a filter of censorship, essentially.
Okay, hang on, because I'm going to cut in with this. It's also cyclical. It's like the people that are complaining now that are so fucking precious. And when did everybody become so fucking precious? Might be rebelling against the fact that their parents were not precious. So this becomes a cyclical thing. What did I rebel against? What did some people will rebel against the conservative of their parents. Then when you have parents that were not conservative, kids become conservative. This becomes a very bizarre cycle that just same as it ever was. It goes round and round and round and round.
It's amazing.
And the main point is this. The main point is still fear of other, fear of outside information, division of wealth. Somebody's got to be the other. So it's got to be the immigrants. It's got to be this person. It's got to be that person of that color. It's got to be that person of that sexual orientation. And this is just the conundrum of the lie that America is, which claims to be liberty and freedom for all. And that's fucking bullshit. This is the biggest hypocrisy, claiming to be democracy that exists on the frickin' planet. I don't know what else to say. I'd like to say this is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Tansey Rosset. And I'm going to be reading some of those banned Grove Press passages for this.
Hooray.
Thank you so much, Tansey.
Thank
Will you please email me your address? Because I wanted to leave you a book and I did. So I have a book.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Really. I really appreciate it.
Nice meeting you. Yes.
It's so great to meet
Yeah,
you.
you too. Yeah. All right. I'll be listening on Friday.
It'll be on Friday. I'll send you the link.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.
Later, I would think of America as one vast city of night, stretching gaudily from Times Square to Hollywood Boulevard. Jukebox winking, rock and roll moaning, America at night fusing its dark cities into the unmistakable shape of loneliness. Remember Pershing Square and the apathetic palm trees, Central Park and the frantic shadows, movie theaters and the angry morning hours, and wounded Chicago streets, horror movie courtyards in the French Quarter, tawdry Mardi Gras floats with clowns tossing out glass beads, passing dumbly like life itself. Remember rock and roll, sex music blasting from jukeboxes, leering obscenely, blinking many-colored along the streets of America, strung like cheap necklaces from 42nd Street to Market Street, San Francisco. One-night sex and cigarette smoke and rooms squashed in by loneliness. And I would remember lives lived out darkly in that vast city of night, from all-night movies to Beverly Hills mansions. He said, if I told you right now that I love you, and you believed it, what would you do? I laughed. But I'm sure he's aware that it's a forced laugh, much like the laughter outside. I'd never stayed around anyone long enough to hear those words, except during sex scenes. Words spoken over and over by hundreds of people, meaning the same thing each time. Nothing.
That's from John Retschie's City of Night, published by Grove Press in 1963. Music by Grid from our forthcoming LP.